What's up, YouTube? We return with another video this week, right after actually recording the previous one with the roster updates for Pacific. You can check that out on the channel. But today we're going to be talking about the VALO2ASIA Awards. VALO2ASIA has selected the top 20 players from VCT Pacific, in addition to the top 5 APAC Game Changers and top 10 APAC Challengers players as well. But we're going to focus on the top 20 VCT Pacific players. I myself, William Cho, one of the casters of VCT Pacific, was honored to be invited to the panel of judges, and I spent a fair amount of time trying to tally together my own votes to see who my final top 20 would be. And once I submitted it, I thought it'd be interesting to compare my personal list to the overall list. Now, how this works is VALO2ASIA, they invite all the judges to put in their top 20 votes, and then they'll tally together everyone's votes to announce, okay, who's the final top 20? Who do we collectively think are the top 20 from VCT Pacific? And there's sure to be different opinions here, so I thought it'd be interesting to find out how it works. First things first, you can take a look at all of our beautiful faces here in the panel of judges. There's me, right there on the bottom of a center. But this is, it's a combination of a bunch of us casters, content creators, etc., that were part of Valorant Pacific in some capacity or form, and then we put in our votes. Now, let's talk about what my list was. You're going to get a peek into everything here, but basically what I did initially, what VALO2ASIA sent us was basically a scratch pad with just one column. Here you can try to draft up your own list, or maybe it had 3 columns but it didn't have the titles. It was just like, hey, draft up your list. Eventually we put it into a separate form online, and then we submitted it. And I thought the problem with a lot of these top 20 lists is, we all have different standards, and I also always struggle with it because I'm like, well, I think this player has like these values, but then this player just like aces all the time or clutches all the time. So how do I really compare the two? So we actually did this live on stream, but let's recap how I decided to go about my final votes. Someone in chat saying they don't know if you trust my opinion. Well, you don't have to, because we had a ton of other judges vote alongside me. But here is my opinion. So I had 3 categories: impression, solo, and package. Now, what these mean, the titles probably need a little work, but impression basically means, okay, in my memory, who just had the most impact, right? Who just left the biggest impression on me, as it says, throughout the year. Now, we go over to the solo category. Now, this was who do I think showed the best solo capabilities. So usually this is mechanics, but a small part of it can be individual decision-making, because if it's like 1vx situations or clutches, the decision-making is a big part of your mechanics. And then I thought about, okay, who do I think is a really good package for the team? These are players who I thought provided a lot more intangible value, right? So things like their flexibility, the way they assist the team all the time, or simply like the amount of anchoring they're doing, it frees up the team to do so much more, things like that. So I tried to create 3 columns. Now, disclaimer ahead of time, as I continue to do these, I do remember I kind of ran out of time because I had to leave before submitting my votes. So the package one, after I submitted it, I was like, oh, there's actually like so many other players I should have considered for the package category. But listen, at the end of the day, if it's someone who wasn't in these 2 columns, then this, them just being only in this category probably wouldn't have eventually put them strongly into my top 20. So we're just going to assume it worked out, but I will just put that disclaimer out that, yeah, the whole package category, I probably didn't put as much thought as I wanted initially. I then created my own point system. I don't know what point system VALO2ASIA used internally to combine all of the judges' votes, but this was mine. Since I had 3 categories, I wanted to make sure we had some decent point disparity as we went forward. So we started from 1 point all the way up to 30 points for who I thought was first place. We're not going to run through every single one of these, but just to talk about some notable decisions I had made. Obviously, Jing, impression-wise, left a very strong impression within Pacific. I mean, he had some crazy moments both throughout Masters Tokyo and Champions, and even just within VCT Pacific. And I think a lot of that comes off of his own solo mechanics as well. Something right behind him, no big surprise there. I think the only reason I put him below Jing on both of these categories is he was a little quiet, right, when Champions came around. Kang, enough said. Let's see, who else is worth mentioning here? Like Bazzi, I think a big part of it is certain clutches he had and all the flashes he had. I just feel like he was such a big part of global esports and whatever success they did find during the year last year. So he was added in. CGRS obviously got added in. I did put him fairly low and only under the impression category because while I think he has created one of the most memorable events and stories for Valorant esports, probably for a long time, I didn't think it was enough for him to like really strongly break into my top 20 list. So I was just trying to keep a level head here. Let's see. For me, I'm a judge enjoyer, so Wisey makes the list, but that might be a little bit of bias. Let's see. Anyone else I want to mention on the solo category? Oh. So, I probably don't need to defend this as much as I thought I might have needed to, since Depp eventually did make the actual final top 20. Now, when it comes to solo, yeah, so Depp, I really thought he was a big part of why Zeta was even able to kind of hang on until everyone else came alive and they changed their calling style and everything. I think Depp was a big part. I thought his operator still had some really big impact. Depp topped the charts for the majority of VCT Pacific. To me, he had some really big highlights as well. So I think both his single mechanics, I mean, he was the player who eventually just said, screw it, I need to make something happen for a lot of their matches on Zeta Division for the majority of the year. Towards the end, I mean, you know, Laz goes back on Chamber and other roles like that. He was starting to pop off a bit more. And other players were starting to try to get back into their groove. But I think Depp bought the most time for them. So that's why Depp goes into this role. That's why he's actually fairly decent on the package category, because I feel like he just created space, open space, and then was flexible enough to go over to the Sova as well towards the end. Who else? I thought Garnett's, showed some really good peaks in individual mechanics. However, excuse me, overall, the team just didn't find much success. And a lot of that, sometimes Garnett's was very quiet for the other games. So he just gets a mention for me on the solo category. I think everything else is fairly straightforward. I mean, I don't think you're going to look at this and be like, boy, well, that just doesn't make sense at all. I think you could argue that you might have different opinions, but probably the biggest question a lot of people have is the package category. And there's just some things I want to mention here. So for RB and Forsaken, I think it's obvious. Their flexibility is just incomparable, right? They're just heads and shoulders above everyone else in terms of flexibility. That opens up their teams to do so much more. So that's cool. I think Devi, his consistency in assists and his ability to clutch is massive for Paper Rex, especially on their W key style. So that's why, to me, and I think this is just one way of like, I feel like Devi is often this big piece of glue that holds Paper Rex together through thick and thin, and there's just no other way to really give him the props for that, except considering it these intangible values that he brings to this team. So that's why he gets rated high there. Mako, I mean, it's his anchoring, his clutching, right? His lurks. Chichu, to me, it's not anything crazy for other teams, but Chichu learning to go for these deep lurks for EDG really added a lot of diversity for that team going into Champions, right? Starting in Masters and going to Champions. So that's why I rate him pretty high. It's the same thing with Nobody, right? His deep lurks, as weird as they used to be for like Sky and stuff like that, I thought had a lot of value, which is why I put him up there. Jet Voice, to me, the consistency and his flexibility to the Sentinel role really continue to keep the hope alive for Talon, although we never saw the light of day for that. Buzz, it's just his ability to entry and create space. I mean, Zeta, I don't like to put IGLing into the discussion here, but Zeta, part of it is a little bit of IGLing. And his consistency when it comes to like his movement on the map. Stacks, it's some of his clutch power. I actually think Stacks had a fairly quiet year. He played pretty well at Champions, but before that. So I was actually surprised to see him pretty high on the overall list, but we can talk about that later. Jesse, again, his initiating very good. I thought Aaron, this is another player where I'm like, I think I do need to give some credit to his IGLing, just because this was a case where it was very clear with the impact of his IGLing for global esports. So I'll put that in there. Yosemite, I just wanted to give a shout out to Yosemite because I feel like he was a big part of that team's success at Champions. But this is why I kind of just put him in a place where I'm like, it's not going to change my overall rankings, but I did want to give him a shout out. Patty Fan, towards the end, his flexibility was starting to see light, but again, it was just a little too late. And I do think something's addition to Paper Rex added a lot of flexibility, especially his ability to op. Now, so here's why I mentioned the disclaimer early on. If I'm going to put something in there for that, I probably should have put Kong Kong into the package category as well. So, again, this isn't my best work. Mind Freak actually just didn't make any of my lists, so I apologize to Mind Freak. He played really well at Champions, but pretty quiet before that. Okay, so now that that's been said, a lot of people have been saying Smoggy should have been top 10, top 20. I do think top 10's kind of pushing it. And I think one thing a lot of us can appreciate with this is when you put it this way, you start to realize, oh, like we actually have some really good players in Pacific, right? I think that's what we can appreciate from this. The fact that we want to argue about, well, this person should have been on this list or this person should have been higher. It's like, oh, okay, we probably do have a really healthy pool of strong players. So there is that. Before we talk about players who aren't on the list on either side, let's talk about the players who are. So let's start from the bottom. Let's start from the bottom. Okay. First up, in number 20 for VALO2ASIA, we have Xfero from RRQ. I don't have a big problem with this. I thought Xfero was probably the brightest light of RRQ last year. He was very consistent, and he has the ability to clutch up for the team. But whether it's because of the way they played or not, he wasn't exactly in a position to make like the biggest of plays. Or something like that. It's kind of weird because RRQ was definitely one of the more exciting teams that seemed to show potential. However, it just goes to show that the top teams were pretty stacked in terms of their roster, right? So, Xfero's the only one that kind of makes it into this list. Same for me, right? I didn't have anyone else from RRQ. Yeah. Elmimore kind of made the cutoff because I put him decently high in solo mechanical play, but that was about it. So, yeah, I mean, I put him on 17th. I think the players from like 16th through 20, the order is not going to matter too much for anybody. So I think that's fairly arguable. Yeah, I think that's fairly acceptable. Honorable mentions got announced too. Oh, you're right. We should include that. Thank you. Where was that? Here we go. Zeta Last Smoggy. Okay. My Y key's broken. Forgive me. Okay. Let's talk about this afterwards. Okay. CGRS, I'm fine with it. Again, I explained my logic. While his story and the plays he made were incredible, the amount of improvement he showed during Masters alone and the ability to handle that type of position and pressure and perform at the level he did, I mean, because basically by the end of Masters Tokyo, I think a lot of us could take away the whole disclaimer in front of him of like, well, he was put into the situation last minute. Like, we could drop that and we would still rank him pretty high throughout Masters Tokyo. So yes, I give him mad respect. But it's also like, you played one event. And personally, I didn't want him to like break into the top 20 because of the one event, because I felt like we had a lot of other good players. However, the impact he had in Pacific and what he showed to the rest of the world and Paper Rex were pretty notable. So him being in the top 20, I don't have a problem. However, I had a very clear reason of why he wasn't in my top 20. I still gave him props where I thought he deserved it, which was the impression part. But obviously that wasn't enough to make it into my own list. So there is that. Nobody. This is one I think a lot of people, especially for the fans who wanted Smoggy in the list, I think nobody's the one you kind of think about and are like, ooh, is he really higher than Smoggy? Now, I said this at the beginning of the stream, but I do think Smoggy is obviously much more consistent mechanically. I think nobody, probably out of the 5 players on EDG, probably showed the lowest of lows during 2023. That is probably true. However, I think he is often also put in this position where he's kind of feast or famine, right? He's like lurking on the sky or something crazy like that. And it's like, well, I mean, it either works or it doesn't, right? And I can't imagine that nobody's in there being like, you know what, I'm just going to start lurking on the sky. Like, you guys do whatever. Like, screw you guys. Surely it's a team decision. So I don't want to cut him too much slack on some of the low points he had, but I also personally did not feel that his low points were so consistent that it was holding the team back overall, right? I think he had some moments, but I also think when he did have impact, it was very crucial. I think whether it was his lurks, whether it was the intel he got, whether it was some of the clutches he had, whether it was a couple of the multi-kills he had, I think those were such big impact moments that I think, despite the lows, I think his highs kind of cover for it. Again, not necessarily in terms of pure KD, but the value that his kills or his info brought for the team. To me, that's why he's in there. Again, 16 through 20, he's in 16 through 20 in the final ranking. I put him a little higher, same with Xfero. I don't have a problem with that, though. He's basically in the same tier of ranking I would have put him on. So it seems like most people agreed with me. The whole Smoggy comparison, we'll talk about it later because Smoggy made it into the honorable mentions. Zest makes it in higher. Now, this is another player that I just straight up did not give props to in my own votes, but I'm glad more people did, because I think Zest came back to play some of his best. I think it's because, to me, it was like, I wanted to talk more about like the Foxy 9 part of DRX in 2023, but they did wrap up the year with the OG5. Zest was a big part of that. He came back to show that he continues to be one of the best, Sovas, especially for DRX. The way he's able to play, the way he's able to set up the team. His aim seemed to have gotten better again, which happens every time he takes a break. So maybe he should just keep taking breaks and coming back. Who knows? But I'm glad he made it in there, because clearly I wasn't thinking straight when I did my votes. And then King. This is the same King. So I rated King a lot higher. I put him in my top 10. Now, what other players did I put him above, right? I put him way above Side Player. Obviously, I put him above Mindfreak because Mindfreak didn't make my list. I put him above RB. I put him above Chichu. I mean, basically everyone here. I even put him above Depp. Yeah, I do wonder, because if this is a cumulative vote, I do wonder what the reasoning here was, because I think the reason he's so high for me is because I rated his ability to anchor very high in his overall value as a teammate, right? The fact that if you have him on the team, at least on defense, you can basically be like, leave that site to king, right? I rate that very highly. Oh, thanks, Asarai. I rate that very highly. Now, this is an intangible, so that part's a very subjective thing. So, you know, if someone said, "Whoa, I don't know about king top 10," I'd be like, you know what, I respect that, but I do think he should be top 15. So I'm kind of surprised he's this low. Personally, if you had to tell me, I think, again, nothing against these players, but I think I would at least put him above players like Stax or Mind Freak. But this could also be because they had better performances at champs, right? And King did not. So there's probably some recency bias involved here as well. And you could argue, I mean, maybe we should weigh champs performance like a lot higher than the other performances. Again, that part's subjective. But if you told me, well, who would you put him above? I'd be like, well, I think at least above Stax and Mind Freak. Again, nothing against those two players, but that's what I would do. So I'm a little surprised by this. But yeah, I just rate his ability to anchor, I think, is very valuable to whatever team he joins. It's also fairly plug and play. Now, if someone were to come up to me and say, yeah, but don't you think that's also a flaw? I would agree. And I think that is the fault I hold with King all the time. No matter which team he plays on, even back on DRX, anytime I had a chance, I would mention that as great as King is, I think that's also his biggest flaw, is that he is simply an anchor sentinel, right? Now that he's learned to play the Viper and such, it's gotten a little bit more diverse, but even with the Viper, it's like, well, I'm going to anchor B-side on Pearl. So he's so good at it, but he's kind of a one-trick in terms of style. He never really picked up the chamber, right? Things like that. He wasn't an opper, things like that. So it's also his fault. So yeah, again, I don't think everyone should agree to put him in top 10, but I do think he deserves to be a little higher. And I think the fact that he can anchor alone just goes to show that solo mechanics are very good as well. Disagree a little bit on the King. Yeah, let's put some marks here. Let's see how we think about this. Yeah. Red are things I don't agree with. Green is, I didn't do this, but I think this is good. Zest is probably going to be the only one that gets that color there. Then we have Depp. He's in the top 15. I think when you do top 20, 11 through 15, that's a bit of a big range, but I think let's do 11 through 15. Let's just do it by tiers of 5. I mean, maybe maybe the top 5 you could argue about order, but so to look at 11 through 15, Depp's in the top 15. So clearly the majority of judges and I agreed on that. I actually thought Depp would go much lower in cumulative votes because I think it's very easy to forget the impact he had for Zeta Division. I think it's very easy to forget the value he provided for Zeta Division to even remain relevant for most of the year. However, I'm glad to see that was not lost on most of our judges, because I would have been very sad, because I thought Depp, again, he topped the charts in so many stats for the longest time in VCT Pacific. That alone, I think, deserves a big shout out. But I think also the fact that he was doing that while the rest of Zeta Division was floundering for a good portion of the regular season just goes to show that this dude was just pulling rabbits out of his hat to stay relevant. So, to me, and that's as the duelist without that much support from your team, right? So it's not like he was playing supposed to say, well, here I go clutching again. Like, that wasn't it. He was going in, sacrificing himself, trying to get at least one kill, opening up the sites. He was going for aggressive op plays, which was not something they used to do. Things like that. And then eventually, when the team turned it up, he was playing the Sova so that they could make the roles work. And he was, once again, a big reason they were able to keep up in those crazy overtimes in the LCQ and eventually win that map on Ascent. He just had so many moments where he was the one who was holding together the team and making things happen and creating space. And I personally rate creating space as one of the biggest values in Valorant, right? Whether it's through a crazy good lurk or whether it's through your entries, creating space note, this does not mean you have to get a crazy amount of kills, but creating space is a very, very important value. It's just that it's intangible. I rate it very highly. So to me, Dep, when I was doing my own, I mean, I have these values here because I want you to know that I basically tallied up. I did these 3 columns subjectively, and then I just tallied up my own point system. So I couldn't fudge it. But personally, I was sad that he was here. I mean, he was tied with Magnet, and I was like, well, in that case, Magnet, I think, beats out Dep. But I almost wanted to put Dep in my top 10. That's how important I think he was. I mean, Asteroid saying it in chat as well. He was the one who was saving rounds when Laz couldn't show up, which was kind of the first half of the regular season, and then on and off for the rest of the year as well. So to me, he at least deserved a shout. You know, my heart wanted to put him in top 10. It's just that our top 10 was pretty stacked. So and my points basically didn't work out that way. So I had to trust my own system. And I'm glad he at least made top 15. I personally thought his work would have been lost on a lot more people. I'm not trying to take away from the judges. It's just that, most of the work he did was like before LCQ. So it's easy to forget about that, right? He wasn't at Masters Tokyo. I mean, it's kind of easy to forget about that. So I don't blame them, but hey, I'm glad he made it into the top 15. Envy. Yeah, we've got some people in chat saying they're surprised Envy was so low and they think he deserved better, because I would agree. However, here's where I can see it. Again, I think it's a case of Team Secret did not make it to the international tournaments. We saw less of the team, and when they played poorly, they looked like they were all flopping around. So Envy playing well, like it's hard to really gauge like how much of that is Envy really playing well. And sometimes it wasn't enough to like win the game. It had memorable moments, but it wasn't enough to win the game. So I think that's probably why. But I think just on pure mechanics alone, to me, he was a top 10 player. I mean, I put him on 5th for pure mechanics alone. I put him above Buzz, Mako, Devi, Magnet, Texture. I guess the other players, I don't think you'd be very impressed with who I'm about to mention. But I put him above those players. I think mechanically, he was one of the most gifted players that we saw in 2023 for Pacific. On top of that, I mean, obviously, he left a big impression on me. I also think his flashes were fairly good, not just for himself, but also for his teammates. His positioning was always there. His backup was pretty good. So, again, I'm a little surprised. I had him in my top 10 into 8th. The overall votes have him at 14th. Again, if you were to ask me, like, well, who would you put him above? I think I would put him above Stax, Chichu, Mind Freak, at the least, which would put him at 11th, so near top 10. But again, I mean, this is collective votes, so we can't fault it, but I am a little surprised. But I think it's one of those cases of like, well, how much do we weigh the performances at Masters and Champions as well? Because obviously some teams weren't there. So yeah, that's an argument to be had. Stax got voted for 13th, and as much as I love Stax, and Stax is, I mean, he's just a great value to VCT Pacific, right? He's the captain of the team for DRX. He's got an attitude. He knows how to trash talk. You love to see it. He's got the mouse kiss ceremony. Love the guy. Hope he plays for a long time. Hope he finds more success on DRX. I think he's a great player. He's had some of the greatest peaks we've seen, especially in Korea, but overall in Asia when he's played at his best. And he played really well at Champions, right? But not so much before that. Brutally honestly, I'm kind of surprised to see him in the list. Brutally honestly. Well, okay, maybe not top 20, because I guess he barely didn't make my own cutoff in my votes. So if he was in 15 through 20, I would have been like, yeah, or 16 through 20, I would have been like, yeah, it's Stax. He played well at Champions. You know, if you want to kind of give that back a nod and be like, yeah, he had a rough year, but he was able to overcome it and he really got back into form for Champs. Okay, yeah, I'm cool with that. But top 15, 13? I think we're rating him a bit high. Personal opinion, though. Again, I mean, this is why they brought in so many judges. So, I mean, we just leave it up to them. Yep, we're continuing the VALO2ASIA review, but this is one I cannot agree with. This is one I cannot agree with. Oh, we should... Hold on. We should recolor code this. Let's make players who I think should be higher yellow. Players who I think should be lower red. And players who I failed to recognize green. Yeah, listen, Stacks is a great player. If you look at his whole career, yes, he should be top 20. Absolutely. Maybe even top 10 if you look at an overall career. But in 2023, I don't know. Maybe my memory is skewed. Maybe my memory is skewed. I'm going to go with no, though. Yeah. I'm going to go with no on that one. Okay, wait. We have... Hold on. Nothing against Razzie, but as much as I love Razzie Banks, perhaps we shouldn't have show matches in the overall rankings. Yeah, I'm going to go with my memory is not skewed on this one. Because he is just about below everyone he could have been in terms of overall rating with his stats. Okay? In fact, it's funny you mentioned IGLing. What am I looking at? Where's my spreadsheet? If we added in IGLing, I would have ranked him even lower. If we added in IGLing, I would rank him lower. The reason I would rank him higher is because once he was no longer dedicated to IGLing and they started to have more fluid calls and more fluid movement, that's when he found his groove again. It's not like his calls alone were that amazing, because if they were, maybe they wouldn't have gotten second place in Pacific. Just saying. Again, obviously there was a lot more going on, right? Obviously there seemed to be some dissonance with the coaching staff in the middle of the year. The team was trying to figure out which roster they're mainly playing with. They had to bring up Foxy 9. I get it. I get it was a tough year. I'm not trying to say like, oh, Stacks just should have played better. No, I mean, I think there's clear reason why he had a tough year. But I'm not here to give out consolation prizes in my top 20 votes. Know what I'm saying? Listen, as a storied player, I don't fault anyone for giving him the vote. I don't fault anyone for trying to give him the nod for IGLing. But I think that's also why you can't take IGLing into account too much. Because it's like, well, okay, yeah, his stats are lower because of his IGLing. So how much of his IGLing was really that good? I always say this, but if you were to tell me like, okay, well, like, can you ever tell if the IGLing is that good? I'd be like, well, I think with FNS you can tell. I would say with Global Esports and Aaron, you could tell. They're I would say, I mean, if anything with Fnatic, I guess it's a question of like, well, how much of it is like really just Boaster versus like the overall team and coaching staff? But I think, to a certain extent with Fnatic, you could tell, like, there are some teams where you can really tell the IGLing is what carries them through. I would actually argue to a certain extent Boostio as well. But otherwise, it's so hard to put a number to that. And it's so hard to be like, okay, so yes, okay, so IGLing is hard, your stats are going to be lower. Fair. But then how much do you like add back in for the IGLing? And yeah, then some people will be like, man, then IGLs never get to see the light of day. Well, I mean, I would hope for dear goodness that coaching staff know to look at IGLing as a value and test that out in tryouts. But I don't know, for like for overall top 20 awards that we're just kind of dishing out in the community, I think it's just very hard. It makes things even more subjective. So personally, I don't agree with Stacks being here. If anything, I think he should be here. If not at all on the list. But I mean, I gave him enough points for his for, you know, what the value he brings in his clutch factor and things like that. So yeah, but I don't agree with this. Okay, we'll stop there though, because I don't want to send the wrong information. I like the guy. I love the guy, and I really hope he stays because he adds so much to the scene in Pacific and Korea. So big fan. All right. Next up, Chichu. Where do I have Chichu? I have him at 15th, so he's higher. I mean, yeah, I think that's fine though. I think him being 11 through 15 is fine. Again, to me, the biggest thing for me for Chichu was the fact that I think I'm not going to say it was him who made that decision, but I do think his ability to finally lurk and things like that opened up the team a lot more during Masters and Champions. So I think you give him a lot of value there. 11 through 15 is fine. The only reason he's higher than on my list is because players like Envy and King are lower, right? So I think Chichu being somewhere in 11 through 15 is fine. I agree with that. RB on 11. Where do I have RB? Oh, I have him on 12. This is like the first time we're like actually aligned. That's crazy. I guess nobody was pretty close. Wow. No, not much more to be said. I guess we all agree. Fairly strong player. Very, very flexible. Great value add for DRX. Good job. 2 thumbs up. Okay, then we get to top 10. We got Saya player in top 10. Listen, I love Saya. We're gonna be repeating this a lot for the Korean players, it sounds like. I love Saya. I think he's a great player. I think he's had some crazy peaks. He's a great Opper and just overall scopes player, right? He's a great long range duelist. But he did overheat a fair amount on T1. I would say earlier people were saying like, man, Smoggy should be in there instead of nobody. Nobody lost EDG just as many rounds as he won them. I would kind of say the same for Saya, in my opinion. I mean, how much of that was just on him? I don't know. Oftentimes when he started to overheat or overaggress, you could see why he was doing it. So I get the reasoning, but for the most part, it didn't work out in 2023. He also wasn't like just dominating the other Jets consistently, right? That would be something. So it wasn't that either. So to me, top 10 is pretty generous. I think 18th is a little harsh. I think 18th is a little harsh, but I mean, that's just what my points total came out to be. Probably because I gave him no points in the package category, but to me, top 10 is very generous for Saya in 2023. Again, we're not looking at their overall history and what they've done in the past. If anything, I think like right in between, right? So somewhere between 13 and 15 is pretty fair. But Saya player in top 10. To me, okay. Oh, let's look at it this way. Okay, you've got, well, okay, let's not count Jing because he plays Rays, but let's look at Jets. You've got something, you've got Buzz, you've got Kong Kong, and you got Saya player. Okay, I'm just gonna put it this way. I think if I had to pick a Jet to build a team with in 2023, I think I would have picked up Depp before Saya player. I know that sounds crazy. Saya is definitely a stronger Opper in general, but I think Depp proved more value. Obviously, they were on different teams, so it's hard to compare 1-to-1. But I think that's where I'm like, I don't know if I agree with this. So, yeah, top 10. To me, he got boosted a little bit because he plays Jet and he plays Op. He's a great player. I think he absolutely deserves to be in top 20. But personally, again, I agree. I think probably my overall votes got a little harsh against someone like Saya player. But I think I would have been I think looking at this and my own, I think I'm content with saying, no, I think he's like top 15. You know? Mind Freak in top 10. This is a tough one. This is a tough one because he played really well at Champs. He really got back into form at Champs. But he did struggle a decent amount here and there before that. Granted, during the regular season, Something and Jing kind of just did everything for the most part for Paper Rex, so the other players didn't have much they needed to do. Given the impact he had and the way he played, you know, reminiscent of Masters Copenhagen in 2022 and things like that, given the way he played like that at Champions LA, I'm okay. I'm willing to concede that he is in top 10. At the very least, I'm very happy he's in the top 20 because I do think he deserves that, because I did not put him in there because I just wanted to hype up too many other players. But top 10, maybe a little generous. However, I don't have much to say there because I don't even have him. I had him in no votes in my 3 categories, and I think that was probably not fair given his performance at Champs. So this one gets a green mark from me. I'm glad people gave him the credit he deserved. Maybe it got a little generous, maybe a little bit of recency bias here, but I do think it's still fair enough. Magnet in top 10. He was my top 10th. He's an 8th. This is as close as it gets. I think it's very fair. I'm glad he got that recognition. He probably could have been higher if he was on a different team, but this is another case of like his team was struggling on multiple different fronts, and he was being consistent, making crazy highlight plays, making it work, and a lot of it through a lot of good decision making on top of mechanics. He had gone through a role swap, things like that. Also a very exciting prospect for Paper X next year. Cool. Buzz in 7th. Man, I'm just going to say this. I think Buzz deserves more hype than he gets. And he already gets a lot of hype. But and it's similar to Deb. I just think he creates so much good space. If you're going to tell me you got to take points off for his opping, fine. I agree. Kind of. I think it got a lot better at Champs. I think his opping is continuing to improve, but yes, it's still not at a point where it seems super consistent. It's still not at a point where you're watching a DRX game and you're like, well, it's over once Buzz gets the op. No one thinks that. But at least we're not all cowering in fear when he picks up the op anymore. So it is improving. But, I mean, 5th and 7th, it's not that far off. It's simply that my points got him into my own top 5. He didn't overall. However, if I look at the other players that are there, Kong Divine, Mako, Something for Seeing, and Jing, I think these are all players that could very easily be ranked higher than Buzz. So fine, be it. I think this is a case of like, I don't know if I can really take fault in the cumulative vote, but I do hope, like, this is one where I hope people don't just look at this article and be like, Buzz at 7th? Yeah, I guess he's a top 7 player. I really hope it's more of a case of like, man, Pacific is pretty stacked, but like Buzz is actually really good. He's a really good duelist, and he's flexible. He's quite flexible. That's why I put him here as well. I actually think I wanted to put him higher, but I wanted to make sure I was giving credit to other intangibles like assists. But Buzz has clutch power. I always say this when I talk about DRX as well. Buzz is that guy for DRX. He's the one who will take the risks, who will go for the aggressive play, who will go for the sacrificial plays. He'll be the one who plays to make things happen. Now, overall, DRX evolved into that as a team at Champions LA, which gave a lot of people hope. But I think Buzz is that guy who consistently does that for the team. But overall in the ranking, fine. From here on out, I don't think we're going to have too many issues, right? It's just a matter of ordering from here on out. But Kong in top 6, I think that's very fair. You look at how mechanically talented he is. You look at how much impact his op has just globally. You look at how much EDG revolves around it, but he still makes it work. On top of that, just the impact he had on the overall scene, I think it's very fair to basically put him right outside of top 5. Putting him to top 5 would have just been kind of riding the hype too much from his op, I think. But very strong. I mean, this is one of those players where it's like, well, we'll just continue to wait and see, right? Especially now as the China League's really growing into its own, like literally. And we'll hopefully continue to see him at international tournaments. Deviant 5, I'm very glad he made top 5. I'm very glad he made top 5. It doesn't matter where. To me, he got in top 3 because I rated him very high on the package level. You know, he had some of the most consistent ratings for me, him and Mako. But I think he provides so much for Paper Rex. He's mechanically gifted. He's got really great decision making. He has really good assists for the team. He can clutch up in 1vx scenarios. I mean, to me, he was a big reason they beat DRX in the Pacific Finals. To me, Devi was the guy. So, Devi in top 5, I'm very happy. I'm actually surprised Mako like wasn't in top 3, but perhaps it's just because of the crazy Paper X run that they had at Champions. So, the impact of these 3 players was higher. Because normally I'm the one who's like trying to tell people to stop hyping up Mako too much. Funny enough, when I put in the overall points, he became my top 1. When I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, this goes against everything I've been saying all year. Not that I think Mako is bad, but I was always that guy who was like, well, I don't think Mako's like the best smoke in the world. And everyone's like, what are you smoking? And I'm like, I just don't know. I think a lot of it's thanks to DRX. And then I put in my own votes and I'm like, oh my God, the numbers tell me that Mako is the best player in my head in VCT Pacific. What have I been telling people? I have no idea. So I'm kind of surprised he wasn't in the top 3. But, I mean, he's great, right? And, I mean, these 3, you could put any order here, and I think no one could argue with you. Yeah, Jing didn't get a high vote from me because I didn't give him any package points, which is, again, probably a little unfair. He probably should have been in my top 3 in some way, shape, or form. To me, something... If anything, actually, Jing probably should have taken the something spot here in my package, my own ranking. But anyway, something top 3? Like, I'm surprised something got top 3 over Mako because he didn't have a great performance in champs. I mean, he did fine. It was very clearly sometimes it was nerves or he was targeted, and you know, what can you do there? Obviously, he's still very mechanically gifted. His individual decision making in just the spur of the moment is very good. His movement is very good. But I feel like we kind of saw the big spark and then it kind of stopped there for the year. I mean, it was just a very bright spark, so it went very far. I hope to see it evolve in 2024. But again, I'm not talking as if I'm like, oh, why is he in top 5? Like, I think he absolutely deserves to be in top 5. It's just, you know, it's something to think about. Oh, like something over Mako, like top 3? I don't know. But Jing, I think, even though he didn't get the most votes from me, I think by all means, I mean, just the way he played at Tokyo and Champs, insane mechanically. I mean, he got first place for me both on impression and solo mechanics. So, you know, it's just because I failed to put him into my package category. But Jing being top 1, I'm all for it. So overall, now who are some players that I eventually had in my top 20 that didn't make it into the collective list? Let's see. So, so Laz, we'll start at the bottom. Laz did not make it in. I'm fine with that. How did Laz make it into my top 20? I put him in the mechanics. Oh, I put him on impact. He did have some big impact towards the end of the year at LCQ. But yeah, I'm fine with him. He did get honorable mention. So I think that's exactly where he actually belongs for 2023. So that's fair. Zeta barely didn't make mine. He barely didn't make the list. Totally fair. Smoggy was honorable mentioned. I didn't put him in any of my lists, but I think this is very fair. I think he deserves an honorable mention. Again, this is very subjective, whether he should be, you know, ranked in place of nobody. I think that's a very subjective matter. But I think honorable mention is totally fine. I think Jet Boys deserved a bit more recognition. Like, I think Jip Boys could have also been a very big contender for like 18th through honorable mention. But I think a lot of the value he brings is so intangible that it was probably hard to rate him highly for a lot of people. Hopefully he's on the starting lineup for next year, because I would love to see him continue to grow. Who else? Bozzy. I do think Bozzy deserved a bit more recognition. I think he was a very big part. I mean, Magnette carried GE, but I think Bozzy was right there behind him for most of that. I think his initiating was very, very good. I think he really embodied his pre-interview before the season about how him having played Duelists really makes him understand what Duelists want from your initiator. I think he just proved he meant that when he said it. Now, I don't think he's strong enough that I'd be like, well, you should have like taken out one of these other players. Well, okay, maybe I would have put him in stacks, actually. But other than that, yeah, it's not that I think he was like absolutely should have taken someone's place, but it's unfortunate. I mean, this is going to happen when you have a cutoff. You're not going to get to mention everyone. That's why it's an award. That's why it's recognition. But it does make me sad. Texture, I actually was surprised he got so many points on my own votes, because I don't think of him as this high on my own. I don't know where he got so many points from me. Mechanics, fair. Oh, his flexibility. Yeah, his flexibility. Pretty big flex. Good opper. Good mechanics. So yeah. But I mean, yeah, this is one where I'm like, I'm actually okay with him not being in the top 20. Now, the difference between him and Bozzy, the difference of why I say I do wish Bozzy still gets some recognition from fans versus like I'm not too concerned about Texture, is just because Texture's already getting enough recognition from fans, right? Whereas Bozzy is one, I think, where a niche group of people still kind of see what value he brings. So that's the difference. And then there shouldn't be anyone else who didn't make the overall list. Okay. So overall, I'm fairly in line with the overall votes. We actually didn't have... Oh, Forsaken was the only one that lines up on my vote and the overall cumulative. So that is the only correct value to take from all these votes. No, I'm joking. But overall, I mean, kind of ranges, except for like... Basically these colored ones, I think everyone else, we kind of agree they're in the right ranges from my own opinion to everyone else's. So while we all have different standards, it does seem like we're all kind of looking at the overall right package. So I'm glad that they're doing this. These colors are my personal opinions. I think Science Stack should be lower. I think Envy and King should be higher. I didn't have Mind Freak and Zest, but that's on me. So at the end of the day, this kind of works out in an overall balance kind of thing, right? So yeah, but going back to the original point I had, this was a very good exercise of remembering Pacific actually was fairly stacked. It was fairly stacked. And I think that continues to show us that we have very promising years ahead of us in Pacific. Very exciting years ahead of us. Exciting rising stars ahead of us and things like that. And if you take a look at some of my Roster Mania videos, I see the same thing there. So I'm very excited for 2024. Curious to see how some of these rankings might change. I mean, obviously, Jing's no longer going to be, sadly, part of the list. But, like, who could top this list, right? Who could top the Paper Rex players? It's like, well, Magnette could, but haha, he's Paper Rex now. Jemkin could enter this list in 2024. Yay, obviously. I think any of the Bleed players could enter this list. I'm very curious to see how the new players do on Zeta Division. So, yeah, like Scary. I mean, any of the guys from Bleed, Darion, Scary, even Crazy Guy, if you put in intangible values. I think even Egoist has the potential too. Obviously, less proven, but on the big stage, but overall. So, very exciting year ahead of us. I'm curious to see how this list changes from 23 to 24. So maybe we'll do a revisit next year. If we're invited to vote once again. But that's going to be it. Congratulations to the players who got voted in, even the ones who weren't on my list. Obviously, these two are very storied players. I think they still deserve the respect, especially for their overall careers. But congratulations to all these players. I believe VALO2ASIA sent medals to, I want to say the top 5. Maybe it was top 10. I think it was top 5. So congrats to those players as well. I'm glad that VALO2ASIA is taking the initiative to give extra recognition to individual players in Pacific, and not just VCT Pacific, but challengers and game changers as well. Especially since Game Changers is coming up, the championship's coming up next week. So very, very exciting. Oh yeah, before I cut the recording, I'm glad you mentioned that Xcurid could also enter the discussion for rankings. I hope he does, actually. That'd be very exciting. So yeah, I think this is worth keeping a look at. So if you want to follow 2024, you can kind of take a look at this list. If you don't know much about the scene, take a look at this list, take a look at overall power rankings for teams, start to follow, because I think it's going to be a very exciting year, and I think it's going to be much more aggressive. I think VCT Pacific is going to be much more aggressive next year. So let's hope for that. Let's hope for more hype, just battles, right? This really relies on DRX changing their style a bit, but you know. All right, well, that's it for the VALO2ASIA Top 20 Awards. Once again, congrats to them. Here are my honorable mentions. You can take a look at that as this video wraps up, but that's going to be it for this one. Let me know. I mean, is it Smoggy? Are there some other players that you think absolutely deserved recognition in the top 20? Let me know who you thought also had some shining moments in VCT Pacific down in the comments below. And of course, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you next time.